Hello, everyone. This is Kevin Cecchine from Ceccpoint News, and I am happy to be a guest on Ask a Libertarian, and quite appropriately because I am, in fact, a libertarian. And truly, at the core of libertarianism is the ethical proposition that basically force is wrong. And so what I mean by that is I don't mean force in defense of property or something along those lines. I'm talking about force not in a defensive manner. And so that's an important distinction here to make. And one of the articles that Ask a Libertarian derived some of those quotes from uh, is an article entitled "Morality is the Goal" that I wrote on my website at ceccpointnews.com. So ceccpointnews.com is a website that I started up with my friend Henry Clay. We started it up back last August, not this past August, but the August before that, August of 2016. But we weren't very serious about it really until more like probably January-ish 2017, where we really started to work hard on this. I coded the entire website from scratch because I just really care about the principles of liberty. I care about promoting it. And of course, I believe that I have valuable ideas that I'd like to bring to the world, and I need to find a way in order to make that profitable if people wish for me to continue to bring those ideas to the world. So that's the only way, of course, we can bring these things into fruition. So I have a lot of abstract ideas, right? And many people tend to have abstract ideas, libertarians, but a lot of the time they have a problem in that they don't usually have a very good plan as to how they will bring these ideas into fruition in the real world. And so one of the ways that we can do that is that we can use what we actually have under our control, right? So we can't really right now, at least until we can have some sort of substantial stranglehold over the government, we can't take down the Fed right now. We can't we can't reduce the size of government in a massive way like we would for sure like to. But what we can do is we can improve our personal relationships. We can understand the philosophy behind liberty. And really what it comes down to is those things is you're doing that which you can control. You're taking control of that which you can control and letting go of that which you cannot control. And that's a very important distinction. That's very important to know, because what is the use in trying to endlessly scream at the Federal Reserve right now? And of course they deserve it, but is that going to actually help bring liberty into fruition? No, we need to start forming alliances, and we need to start bringing libertarianism into our own lives on the family level and on levels where we can actually control it. And I would say that the core of libertarianism is an ethical proposition, that you have property rights and that people should respect the non-aggression principle. And so you can't really argue against this type of this way of examining morality, and it was very well outlined in Stefan Molyneux's book on ethics, universally preferable behavior, a rational proof for secular ethics. Now that even applies if you are a Christian, right? You want to say, well, how can you epistemologically approve that ethics exist, whether a deity exists or not? And so that's very important, because you want atheists to follow the rules of objective morality as well. And morality is objective, all you moral relativists out there. It's very important to understand that as well. So it's based on the core moral axiom, the axiomatic rule that we all have property rights, and that first starts with you. So if you try to argue against the idea that we don't have property rights, right? You're using your vocal cords, you're using your body to express to me that you don't have property rights. You're acting in free will, using your own body, therefore exercising property rights to tell me that you don't have property rights, which is a contradiction, my friend. So contradictions cannot exist if we are to be rational and if we are to be logical. So that's extremely important to know as well. And so what I would say is that it's very hard to argue against universally preferable behavior. It's very hard to argue against these objective ethical propositions, because whether or not you choose to follow them, they exist. It's just like science. You can tell me all day that the sun isn't the center of the solar system, right? But then it's just not true. You can tell me that the earth is the center, and you can say that, but it's still objectively false. And that's the same thing with these objective moral rules. And so it's the same thing if you say that, let's say you said that stealing is okay. Well, if you put the proposition that stealing is universally preferable, then if someone goes and someone tries to, let's say I'm a thief, and I try to make the ethical proposition that stealing is not a moral atrocity, that it is perfectly fine and perfectly ethical to do. Well, then once I take the property from someone else, what I have done is I've claimed that property as my own. But the problem is, first of all, as soon as you have completed the actual stealing of the property, well, now you're being unethical, right? According to your own ethical principle that you've laid out. Because anytime that you are in the absence of stealing, once you are not stealing, then you are by definition being unethical, right? Because it's the opposite of what would be ethical by your moral proposition. So anytime that you're sleeping or when you're not stealing, then you are by definition being unethical according to that rule. And then also, it's universally preferable, because even if you say that I don't find it universally preferable, I don't find it particularly preferable for me to do, even if you say that, it's not actually true, because let's say someone tried to steal that from you after you stole it from someone else. Well, you would defend it as if it were your property. So you act out these moral axioms as if they are true. And I would argue that morality, and of course this is a gross oversimplification, I would argue that morality and ethical principles, they embody a wisdom that goes far beyond what we could consciously garner up, what we could consciously decide is right or wrong. They garner a wisdom that goes far beyond that, and that's extremely important to note. Whether that comes from God or from evolution, it matters not, because it's a wisdom that goes far beyond what we can consciously decide. So they are core moral axioms. Now, in the moment, you might say, well, it's preferable that I am going to steal this because it'll benefit me in the short run, right? So it may benefit you in the short run, but we all know that that's also not a recipe for long-term happiness. But I don't come at this from the consequentialist argument that consequences or the ends justify the means, because they don't. Like I said, core moral axiomatic rules, they carry a wisdom that is far beyond anything that you or I or anyone else could garner up and decide is moral or not. All right, there we go. This should be working as well. Let's see. So if you're listening once again, I am back, and I'm on my mobile device right now, and I was just talking about the moral core principles of libertarianism and how Austrian economics, the free market, and all of the fruits of that, all of the positive externalities that come as a result of the universal application of the non-aggression principle, or just the greater following of the non-aggression principle. They are simply a consequence of that. And I'll get into, that is my take on libertarianism, and I am fully, and of course, again, a gross oversimplification and things like that. And yes, free Tommy Robinson. That is some scary stuff, what happened recently with him. It is very concerning, and I will get to that soon. So this goes into the more controversial side of my beliefs and how I believe that we can bring libertarianism to bear. Of course, I think it starts with the individual. I think it starts with fixing our own lives and controlling that which we can control. And I've already expressed that, right? But I started an organization, Ceccpoint News, that is targeted towards conservatives and libertarians. Because I think that they, even though maybe they share a different total end goal, I don't believe that we will see a stateless society within our lifetimes. And so we share a common goal of reducing the size and power of the state. And I would say with true conservatives, I'm not talking about the rhinos, I'm not talking about people like that. I believe that the true conservatives, this is true for. So I believe that what we need to do is we need to align ourselves with conservatives if we truly wish to win, if we truly wish to reduce the size and power of government. And I will absolutely get to your question in a second. And so that's sort of the core principle behind Ceccpoint News, is that we are bringing together libertarians and true conservatives around the common goal of reducing the size and power of the state. And I would say that I am perfectly fine with aligning with the president. I supported Donald Trump for president in 2016 for this goal, and I don't agree with everything he says, but I believe he will bring us closer to this goal. I believe that the Republicans will bring us closer to this goal. And here's my problem with a lot of libertarians, is that what they do is they have a tendency to say, okay, well, I want to stick to my principles, right? But then I'm not really concerned about politics, but then I'll also go and I'll vote for a candidate that might lose or might spoil the election. Let's say that there was someone running against Rand Paul as a third-party candidate. Well, let's look at the practical effects of that. If Rand Paul loses, right, as a result of that, then what have we done? We've actually, in effect, grown government, because we've empowered those who would win against Rand Paul. Let's say if the third-party candidate was acting as a spoiler. Well, we've empowered the other party, the opposition party, to grow government even more. And so we've, in effect, actually grown government rather than shrank government. We've increased the violation of the non-aggression principle rather than decreased the violations of the non-aggression principle. So I think it's imperative that we align ourselves with conservatives, at least in the interim between now and when we have a minimalist state. So I think that is extremely important. So I'm going to answer a few of your questions here. Any thoughts on Austin Peterson following his Senate race at all? Yes, actually, we interviewed Austin Peterson very recently. You can check that out on our website, ceccpointnews.com. That's CECCPOINT news.com. And I absolutely personally support him. I think he's great. I think he has a pretty good chance he has a great chance of winning if he's able to beat Josh Hawley in the primary. The problem is, Josh Hawley is endorsed by President Trump, so that's going to be an uphill battle, and I think he has a lot of name recognition within within Missouri specifically. Now, of course, Austin Peterson, I think, has a greater name recognition amongst libertarians, obviously, but then also because he is a former presidential candidate. But then he also has a greater name recognition across the nation. So it's very much spread out across the entire nation. Whereas in the case of Josh Hawley, it's very concentrated within the state of Missouri. So that's an unfortunate uphill battle that Austin Peterson is going to have to fight. I think if he can get past Josh Hawley in the primary, and he is in second place, and he has until, I believe it's August 8th. So if he is able to get past that, then I think he has a great chance to be able to win in the general, and I think that would be a great win for Liberty. And I can tell you that I support him 100%. So that's what I have to say about Austin Peterson. He's great. I have a difference of opinion with some, in regards to some things with him. I actually, and this is very strange, right? Even though I understand the core moral axioms of libertarianism, and even though I understand how important it is that we follow the non-aggression principle, once we achieve that society, I believe in the short run that we need to enforce our immigration laws, and that does not bode well with many libertarians, and that's something you may want to ask me about, because it's very strange with libertarians nowadays, because a lot of libertarians who have adopted that policy have abandoned libertarianism as a whole, but I believe that's because those people were never truly libertarians. I believe they didn't truly understand the philosophy behind it and how complex it is. And of course, there's no way that I can encapsulate the entirety of all of libertarian philosophy in this live stream. I mean, it's extremely complex. It's a beautiful philosophy that can bring out a much better world by following core moral axioms, and it is in alignment with human nature, with human incentives. It relies on incentives, not on the moral constitution of each individual. It relies on each person to pursue their individual interests that so happens to result in everyone benefiting. So that's important to note. Whereas communism, something along those lines, because they'll say, oh, libertarianism is utopian. No, communism is utopian because it relies on people not being governed by incentives, not being governed by their individual interests, whereas libertarianism actually relies on that, and it factors that in, actually. So it's completely the opposite of a communist utopian dream. Anyway, John asks, what do you feel is the best way to address the debt over $20 trillion? Roxanne asks if Ceccpoint News has an app. Ceccpoint News does not have an app, first of all. That's the question that I can answer fairly quickly. And in regards to the $20 trillion debt, obviously that's a problem. So, what we could do is, if we could get more Liberty Republicans elected, right, because we need to be focused on the consequences of our actions. We can sit here and be activists, right? We can sit here and be activists and say, well, I believe in libertarianism, so I'll only ever vote for anyone who adopts the entire philosophy of libertarianism and starts spewing that everywhere. But then you're not actually increasing the level of liberty within the nation. You're not actually reducing the violation of the non-aggression principle. You're not actually helping anyone. You're just basically virtue signaling. And so what we need to do is we need to be focused on the consequences of elections and actually get people in there through primaries, and that's why this primary season is so essential. It absolutely is. And so what we need to do is we need to be focused on getting the right people in the primaries, and let's say Austin Peterson would be one of them. And if we could get enough of them, if we could get enough Liberty Republicans, we could vote for something like the penny plan. And that is, it cuts 1% from every federal program. You just keep doing that, and eventually, in not too long, of the time. It balances the budget, and then we can begin paying down the debt. But of course, the problem is government is always incentivized to rack up the debt because it is a core problem with it, because with government, at least as it exists today, the politicians have absolutely zero incentive to live within their means, because they can borrow from the future. They can borrow from future generations, sell them into debt slavery in order to make their constituents happy in the here and now. And by the time, let's say, the debt racks up to the point where our bonds are useless and no one wants to buy them, and we have an economic collapse because people lose faith in the dollar and people stop buying our bonds, and so we can't borrow anymore, and we have an enormous crash due to loss of faith, well, they'll be long out of office. They don't have to worry about it. But people want free stuff in the here and now, and politicians will fill that demand by voting, I guess, for the increase in the budgets for these federal programs to give people free things. And it's very difficult, right? Because people then make life decisions based on that. They have more children based on that, the fact that they're going to have this income. So what happens all of a sudden if we lose our ability to borrow as a nation, and then suddenly we have to cut these programs overnight? You're going to have a lot of people suffering, and it's not going to be funny, and it's not going to be pretty, and I don't want that to happen. So the penny plan is the most humane way to be able to solve this issue. You just cut the federal budget 1% every year, and then it can actually balance the budget, and then we can start slowly paying it down. That is the soft landing, and the hard landing is if we lose our ability to borrow while you have an enormous amount of people who are dependent on the state for their income, who are dependent on the state in every single conceivable manner. And trust me, it's more than just income. It's a variety of things. And let's say these people, they have more children than maybe they would otherwise have. And then so what they do is they're not going to be able to feed their children or something like that, and you'll have riots in the streets, complete instability. You do not want us to have a crash landing. It will not be good, and I guarantee you one thing, that will not result in a libertarian Ancapistan. Absolutely not. That will result in a socialist Venezuela-style government in the aftermath of that. I would not recommend advocating for the collapse of the system. I hear a lot of libertarians advocating for that, and I just do not agree. So, the $20 trillion debt has to be paid down, and it will be our demise if we do not figure out a way to be able to reduce spending. It absolutely will. It cannot be sustained. These bankers, the Federal Reserve, let's say they're not buying our debt out of benevolence. They're not buying our debt because they care about us or out of some sort of like I said, patriotic benevolence. No, they're buying our debt because they see it as profitable, because they believe that they'll be able to get more out of it, right? It's an investment, essentially. That's why they buy our debt. They do not buy our debt to be nice. And if they do not believe at a certain point if they believe that they're not going to get any money back on that, they will stop buying our debt, and we will suddenly overnight have to cut a lot of programs, or the government will collapse as a whole. And both are very not good situations, right? Because you don't want something to have that like that to happen overnight. It will not produce libertarianism. Libertarianism has to come out of a conscious decision. It has to come out of a conscious decentralization, not out of catastrophe. Can't. History proves that. Is freedom only necessary for the immoral because moral people don't break laws? Is freedom only necessary for the immoral? No. So once you have a free society instated, right? Let's say you have a free society, the incentives for being immoral will be so low once the free society is actually brought into fruition. The incentives for being immoral, because no one would do business with you. You wouldn't be able to engage in commerce. Everything would be so efficient, and all demands would be met, that if anyone saw you as untrustworthy, it would no longer be nearly as profitable. And one thing that you can count on is human incentives. You can't count on human benevolence. You can't count on people adhering to abstract ideals. But what you can count on is that people are governed by incentives. And so the idea is, in a free society, the incentives for criminality would be so lowered that it would become an extreme rarity, and it would be easy to deal with. So that's how the best I can answer that question. Tom asks if you are planning to run for office at any time. It is possible in the future. Right now I'm focused on trying to build Ceccpoint News, trying to build our brand, build our YouTube, provide better content to you. I'm trying to make this profitable. I'm trying to get donors for us to be able to actually full-time work on this and make sure that we bring philosophy, education, reporting, journalism to you, the listener, to you, the reader. So that's what I'm focused on right now. I'm not going to rule out anything in the future, but I'm also not going to confirm it. So I will neither confirm nor deny that. Should we build the wall? I believe, personally, and this is going to be very unpopular among libertarians, I believe that we should build the wall. I support President Trump, and this is going to be kind of confusing because I don't support every policy. I don't support every policy the conservatives put out and I don't support every... So when libertarians try to tell me that that's not principled, well, it's like according to the core principles of libertarianism, a lot of what the Libertarian Party stances are not in alignment with that either. You guys are both technically minarchists because you're either, because you're both for the reduction of the state. He's president right now, and I supported him because he had the best chance, the ratio between the best chance and the smallest government that we could get. Hillary Clinton, I guarantee you, would not have brought us any closer to a libertarian state. Now, we got tax reform, we got lower taxes, less coercion. We have a chance at a balanced budget. We have a chance. There was a vote on it, and I believe at least 21 senators voted for it. And I believe that the wall will in total, right, because I'm interested in reducing government in the long run. So I believe that the wall, if you reduce illegal immigration and you reduce illegals being able to vote for larger government, because, again, people are governed by incentives. I'm not saying that they're evil. People know that if there is a welfare state, that they can go and just vote for the increase in the welfare state, and they can pillage from our children's future because that's the way the government finances, through deficit financing. And so it doesn't matter because people don't, and again, that's another problem, is the Fed, because people don't feel the immediate effects of these enormous programs. They don't feel the immediate effect of it, and so they don't rally against it. You get to defer it all to the future, which screws over the future generations, but hey, who cares, because my constituents are happy now, right? That's how politicians operate. And so, no, I do believe that we should build the wall on the southern border. I do believe that it will result eventually in a net reduction in government, as silly as that may sound if you're hearing it for the first time. But I think it's a good argument, and I think Stefan Molyneux lines out, he puts out some good arguments in support of that. Travis Hallman asks, libertarians within the Libertarian Party, such as Gary Johnson, are assertively suing the presidential debates for more fair elections. Simultaneously, libertarians within the Libertarian Party are suing their states for such high criteria on ballot access. Both of these goals are being accomplished. Question: how would... Oh, wait, I lost it. Oops. I lost that. Okay, question... Oh, no, I lost where I was. Oh, boy. Hold on a second. Question: how would elected Liberty Republicans carry the vanguard of liberty by creating more fair debates for all parties? So I don't think that necessarily that electoral politics is necessarily a core part of libertarianism. I believe it's a strategy. So there's two differing strategies. There's the infiltration of the Republican Party, at least two main strategies. There is the infiltration of the Republican Party, and then there's the building up of the Libertarian Party. Look, I believe that if you were to build up, you can do both simultaneously. Now, if you are interested in building up the Libertarian Party, I believe that you should start on the local level. If you do it on the federal level, you're just wasting time and resources, in my opinion. I believe that you can get if you really concentrate hard and you pour a ton of resources, you can get state representatives, you can get state senate seats, and you can start building it that way from the ground up, from the grassroots up. Going for these very high positions first, I don't think is a viable strategy. I don't know. I think of course they're going to, and it's very difficult to actually fix the whole two-party thing. It's designed that way. I argue that it's, in my opinion, I believe that it's going to be more fruitful to try to infiltrate the Republican Party rather than to take down the incentive structure that created the two-party system in the first place. I'd rather try to infiltrate through sort of the Ron Paul strategy. I think that's rather important. So I hope that answers your question. John asks about your opinion of Adam Kokesh. I love Adam Kokesh. He is someone who brought me into libertarianism, and I really do support him. And I think that I think he really outlines the ideas of it very well. So I think he's a great introduction to libertarianism. So I believe that I truly do support him in his endeavors. But I think he was great. I was introduced to libertarianism through Adam vs. the Man, his program. So yeah, that's. It was sort of a vague answer. Because it was a vague question. What do you think about him? I've met him several times. I know him. So yeah, that's what I have to say. Where is the line? So Cameron Baird, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, asks, where is the line drawn between a law or a rule that impairs someone's right to do what they want and that doesn't? Right, so you could argue gun laws impair everyone else's freedom, and you could argue they don't. So So you'll sort of need to hone that question in, right? Because it comes down to, and this is why the core moral principles are important, because then you're just playing whack-a-mole. If you say, well, this is liberty oriented by some sort of subjective analysis, it's not as useful as saying, let's look at this from an objective perspective and say, well, property rights or no property rights, and what you can do within property rights when you go from property rights and then you try to figure everything else out. That's what's important. So I'm not really sure what your question asks, really at the core of it. I'm not really understanding what the question is. Basically, property rights, and if it violates property rights, then it's not in line with liberty. So William makes the comment, I feel depraved because I'm deprived. Any comments? No comment. Can you pronounce your last name again? Joe. My last name is pronounced Cecchine. Cecchine, Kevin Cecchine, and that's hence the Ceccpoint News. So the first few letters of my my last name are how you pronounce the first part of Ceccpoint News. So it's CECCPOINT news.com, and so that's where it comes from. That's where it's derived. So yeah, let's see. So yeah, I mean it's very confusing for a lot of people because I have a mix or I have a variety of opinions. When did you figure out that you're a libertarian? I figured out that I'm a libertarian. That I was a libertarian when I was originally a conservative, but it wasn't as I was originally a very normal conservative, you could say, or traditional conservative, and then I sort of looked at the inconsistencies there. Not there was no universal moral rules. There was no grounding. There was no ethical principles that grounded the ideology. It just seemed like it was Democrats minus 20 years or something like that. It wasn't actually grounded in something that was timeless, that was core and moral. It was just we want kind of smaller government than Democrats, and I don't believe that. First of all, I don't believe it's compelling. I think it's a losing battle. I mean, you look at what's happening with Republicans, and what happens with Republicans is that they constantly lose to Democrats. And so I don't think it's useful. And what I mean by that is I don't mean that they lose every election, is that they lose position. So look at someone like Barry Goldwater, who is very much in line with libertarianism, basically, a libertarian conservative, essentially, akin to Rand Paul. And he lost... he lost in a landslide, unfortunately, because the Overton window is constantly shifted by the left, and the more they get the welfare state through, the more they get people dependent on it, and then you're trying to fight people who are fighting for their livelihood, who are fighting for resources to keep their families aligned because they needed it, because now they've made decisions based on having those resources in the future. So you have a big problem when you're trying to fight against those who are extremely incentivized by sort of baseline just sort of impulses, you could say. They need those resources in the immediate. Now they don't even have the skills. It becomes an intergenerational problem. So the welfare state is the most destructive, and this is another reason why I argue for the alignment of conservatives and libertarians, because some of the opposition that conservatives may have to libertarianism is they might in the abstract they might disagree with some of our core principles. But it's much easier to get people to turn around on pure abstractions than it is to get people to turn around on that which provides them with resources, right? So that is something we have an instinct to garner as many resources as possible. So that's something that it's very difficult to fight that. Whereas a lot of the problems that conservatives have with us, or at least true conservatives who are interested in fiscal conservatism, they are only in disagreement with us as it pertains to not moral, but just abstractions, purely abstractions. Whereas other people are fighting literally for their resources, and so it's much more of an uphill battle. We have much more to relate with conservatives on, Okay, so Travis Hallman asks, besides Ron Paul, can you exemplify any Liberty Republicans that align with anarchist values? Okay, so you could say... you could argue that Thomas Massey, Justin Amash, Rand Paul, and you could even maybe extend that to some degree to people like Ted Cruz, to people like to Mike Lee, people like that. And so, of course, they're not going to openly say, I think that we should live in a free society, but of course they're driving us much closer to that in a way that it's acceptable, and they can culturally relate to their constituents, while simultaneously reducing the size and power of government and trying to get some fiscal responsibility or bring some fiscal responsibility to Washington. So I think that that's great. I think that's a viable strategy. I'm going to work hard to do that. And of course, if you are involved in the Libertarian Party and you're making great strides and you're actually bringing liberty to people's lives, or you're using it as an educational platform, then great, more power to you. I wish you luck. And actually, that's something my great friend Adam, you can see we have pictures together, he's doing that right now. He's running for the Libertarian nomination in 2020. So absolutely. Just so we all know, the time is now 3:45 p.m. and we have approximately 15 minutes remaining. Please feel free to continue as the questions come in. I will absolutely feel free to continue. I have a lot to say. I mean, I could keep going on and on and on because I have a lot to say, and sort of I'm giving you a surface analysis of a lot of the problems that we are facing and a lot of the problems that exist today. And so if you do visit our website, make sure to get on our mailing list. I would very much appreciate that, so that you can keep up with our stories. Now, a lot of our stories are tailored to conservatives because we're trying to get them on board. We're trying to get them to understand that that libertarianism, it's just a few small steps away from conservatism, and that we just more universally apply our principles of small government than do conservatives. And you can see this exemplified also with Austin Peterson, as to your question. Austin Peterson is being supported by Ben Shapiro, who's a very well-known conservative, right? Because you can be a conservative and also be libertarian. I am a conservative libertarian. I believe in conservative values on a personal level, right? But I believe in making sure that people aren't immoral. I don't believe in forcing people to be moral necessarily, and there is a distinction, right? Because you could say that there are moral rules that come out of, let's say, Christianity, and Christianity is, by the way, heavily in alignment with libertarianism, let's say, but there are other rules that that do come out of Christianity, right? But actually what makes them moral rules is that it's up to your own free will, is that you exercise individual virtue, and that's what makes those actions virtuous. That's what makes you following them virtuous. If someone forces you to do it, then they're removing the element of free will that would have allowed you to, when it was expedient, to break those moral rules. And so actually, the best way to bring about the accentuation of the Christian faith is to bring about libertarianism, right? Because then it forces the individual to be solely responsible for their moral virtues, for their adherence to those virtues. So I believe that Christianity is 100% in alignment with libertarianism. They are 100% compatible, and I know a lot of people argue against that, but I don't see a valid argument as to why they are conflicting with each other. And if anyone wants to argue with me about my support of Donald J. Trump, they are welcome to. They're welcome to call in to, that's actually something we're going to start soon. Actually, we're also starting a merch store. We're going to allow people to call in, preferably patrons, I think, so that we can have great conversations, great philosophical conversations about these issues. And I'm willing to dive into basically anything that you want to, because I have done a lot of thinking, whether you know it or not. I've done a lot of thinking about these topics. So, again, the website is ceccpointnews.com. It is CECCPOINT news.com, and please make sure to get on the mailing list. Please make sure to like us on Facebook, and check out all of our videos on YouTube, on Ceccpoint News YouTube. We're constantly trying to put out new and great and better content. And I truly do, I have so many arguments against people who don't believe in libertarianism, but I believe in aligning with people who believe in just generally smaller government because we have a shared goal. So yeah, that's what I believe in fundamentally as a strategy. Those aren't my core fundamental beliefs. Of course, no one is that simple, you could say. So yeah, so what I would say is that I could go on about, let's go into economics. We absolutely, and I sort of have expanded on this already, but I can reiterate again, or that's sort of redundant. But anyway, I could say that the core issue of why we cannot align ourselves with the left, other than all of the negative externalities that would entail, that you could sort of observe, is because they are much more motivated to perpetuate the existence of the welfare state than, let's say, conservatives are to perpetuate the existence of the military-industrial complex, because those are the two essentially welfare states. One is welfare for contracting companies, but here's the difference, though. It's not like all of the conservatives directly benefit from that. It's purely abstractions to most conservatives, right? Whereas it's not an abstraction to those who are receiving benefits directly from the government. Whereas they're like, yeah, you can say I support the military, but I don't support the military-industrial complex. You can make that argument, and it is a valid argument. I would suggest. And so in that way, I believe that our strategy is to distance ourselves from the left. I've had a problem with a lot of libertarians who tend to try to appeal to the left by, let's say, flaunting their drug policy, saying, oh, addiction's not a crime. While that may be true, it's not going to. You're not going to get people who are incentivized to vote for larger government just by saying that we agree with you on drug policy, because you could easily get Bernie Sanders to say that he supports weed legalization. So then, how are you going to compete? Even so, even if he didn't, the fact that he supports the welfare programs is enough for them not to vote for you and to vote for him instead. Now, you might not catch as much heat, but what have we been able to figure out from the election of Donald Trump is that the polarization effect, while it may drive up a lot of haters, it also simultaneously drives up devoted fans, and so that's an important aspect to remember. Libertarians are very much interested in gaining the spotlight, but the problem is they're too afraid, I think, to be controversial. So they need to talk about things that are controversial that may produce the negative externalities of controversy. But that's a good thing, because then you're seen as principled. So you may get haters, but you can't be afraid of that, because what comes along with haters is a devoted fan base. So yes, that's extremely important. How do libertarians in the Libertarian Party differ economically from Republicans in the Republican Party? It depends which Republicans you're referring to. So obviously a Republican like John McCain is completely different, but a Republican like Rand Paul essentially has the same goal. So that's that's the way I would describe it. So that's sort of just my strategy. And I would say that the most fundamental problem here is that the Federal Reserve System screws up incentives. And see, it's not just like us. It's not just like the United States as a central bank and no one else has this exact problem. But the problem is the United States government, let's say it was started as a minarchist government, and then it turned into one of the largest governments on earth, because what the government does is it pillages all of the wealth and prosperity that is produced by a minimalist state, and then uses that as leverage to borrow money and produce the largest government. And so it is a core problem of incentives, and the problem is when you have open borders and a state at the same exact time, what you get is nothing more than the perpetuation of the continued increase of the welfare state. So you can't allow that to happen. If you care about any externalities at all, which you should right now, because I'm telling you, if you allow the system to crash as a result of that, then we will not get libertarianism out of that. There is no way that we can get libertarianism out of a complete crash. What is your most favorite accomplishment by President Trump? What is your least favorite accomplishment by President Trump? So my most favorite accomplishment by President Trump is probably, well, a mixture of the tax reform, so lowered taxation, lowered theft. He's reduced theft on the population. That's very libertarian. And the fact that he is reducing regulatory burden on companies, that's actually very helpful. That's very libertarian economically speaking. So yeah, I'm happy with those two things. Those are sort of the best, and I also agree with much of his immigration policy. My least favorite thing that President Trump has done is probably the signing the omnibus spending bill. It was extremely disappointing, and I came down hard on him for signing that bill, and so I do not approve of that in any way. Rob Jarrett asks, I'm a big fan of your destroying the absolute establishment policy, but not so much your reigning in a libertarian social order policy. Can you expand on those thoughts? So you don't need to agree with me on my abstract end for society if we both agree on the short-term goal of reducing the government and kicking out the established order. So that's the great thing about alliances, is that right now, and I believe that in the long run it will become apparent that libertarianism is the best way to organize society. Following moral rules is the best way to organize society. Exercising extreme hubris that you saw with communism in the 20th century. Communism and fascism both alike. Now, communism was supposedly out of benevolence, but you see that they're like, oh, well, the ends justify the means, so we can figure out how to properly allocate resources from a centralized location, not using the mechanism of supply and demand that has come about within human social order as one of the greatest discoveries in all of human history, that has been able to properly allocate resources in a resource scarce way, and it was completely abandoned because it's like, well, I know when it's right to steal, and I know when it's not right to steal. And so what did you get? You got the complete collapse of the Soviet Union because they didn't know actually how to allocate resources. They were able to get into a ton of debt. They were able to promise things in the here and now, and then, of course, a ton of people starved, and the same thing with Mao's China. And, of course, communism is one of the greatest evils because it's so tempting to a lot of people who do believe in this utopian idea that sort of government can make the entire world egalitarian. Egalitarianism is a complete lie, but universal moral principles is a complete truth, because in most of our relationships we already practice those, and we can see how well it works where you decrease the level of coercion and you increase the power of the marketplace, and what you get is a more prosperous society, because only supply and demand can efficiently allocate resources in a resource-scarce world. So yeah, you don't need to agree with everything that I believe in right now, right? So eventually, of course, I hope everyone will, but I don't agree with Trump on everything, but I support him because he's getting us closer, at least, to the ideal. And now that may be, the ideal, you could argue, is somewhat of an asymptotic relationship where we simply get closer and closer and closer, but never actually achieve the ideal, but we can at least get rid of institutions that promote coercion and violence, and we can rely on human incentives, which I think would very much help. And so, those are my thoughts on that. And so, again, it's so important that you guys check out Ceccpoint News. Here's my business card for it. So please make sure to check it out. Check it out at Ceccpoint News. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube. Make sure to get on our mailing list. make sure to click the bell on YouTube, because you know they're trying to censor us. They're censoring conservatives and libertarians. And make sure to share as much of our content as possible to fight the algorithms, because of course the Silicon Valley is run by leftists, as we know. So the tech industry is completely infested with that. So yeah, hopefully you guys can find all of that. And so I am almost done here, and thank you everyone for watching, and I hope you'll continue to look at our content and see what we're doing. We're interviewing a ton of candidates. We're really working hard each and every day. So if you could donate, if you could become a patron at patreon.com/checkpointnews. If you can follow us on Twitter also, and mine Steemit and Gab and all of that. If you could do all of that, that would be extremely helpful, and I would appreciate it a ton. And we're working hard each and every day to bring us closer to libertarianism, to bring us closer to economic sanity, to avoid fiscal ruin, and to bring about a more moral world. And so we're trying to work very hard, and we're trying to make this profitable, but we need your help. We need you, the listener, to in order to make this possible. So please help us out any way that you can. Please share this video as well. Get it out to as many people as you can. And if no one has any more questions, then I'm going to end this video. So thank you so much for watching, and good luck to everyone.